Good morning, everybody. I want to start off this panel with a short reference to one of my favorite film series that I'm sure many, many of you have seen in this room, and if you haven't, then you should, Back to the Future. Now, what does this series, the 3 movies, have to do with intergenerational fairness? In the movies, Marty Jr., the son of Marty, is the embodiment of his decisions and actions across the films, from having a very good future to a very bad one, to even not existing. He is the embodiment of continuity between generations, of what the future is. So I think it's a good reminder, a playful reminder, but it's a reminder that everything that we do when it comes to the future is ultimately, maybe also for us, but more importantly for people that are younger than us, or maybe that are very, very little. So we'll talk today about intergenerational fairness with my amazing panelists. And the question I have, and I'll ask Lucie first, she's the EU ambassador here in the UAE. What does intergenerational fairness look like in practice, in your experience? What are examples that you can share?
So first of all, thank you very much for including me in this very interesting debate. When I started looking into our policy on intergenerational fairness, I really thought, I don't know much about it. It's quite a new concept. And the more I read about it, I realized that, in fact, it's something that we've been doing for quite a while in the European Union. And even through a policy that is very close to my heart, and it's climate action. I think that this really is the first very concrete application of intergenerational fairness in the European Union context, where the #1 objective is, of course, preserving the planet for the future generations. But the more the policy evolved, we tried embedding also public consultations, which is something very important in the decision-making process in the European Union, and increasingly focus on youth and future generations also in the consultations. So if you look at the European Green Deal and in the EU climate law and how it actually came to being, it's not just the industry that we're talking about on what is possible and how to get to our very ambitious climate targets, but it's also the youth, the civil societies, and different stakeholders across the European Union. I also have another example, which is not only climate focused, and that is in 2019, we organized a 2-year-long series of conference on the future of Europe. And that was really the first, I think, big public consultation on what Europe should look like, what the European Union should look like for the future generations, what kind of reforms we should do. We have reformed the EU several times, but this time it was really a consultation with very important focus on involvement of youth, and we really had teenagers who were co-chairing working groups with commissioners or with the president of the European Parliament. So I think these are 2 very concrete applications of intergenerational fairness that we are still drawing lessons from and that are helping us to form our policy on intergenerational fairness that we are working on now.
Thank you. Cécile, UNICEF, I think, might even be at the origin of thinking of children as the embodiment of the future. I think there was a report in the 60s, late 60s, by UNICEF that even coined what we today take as a given, the idea that a good childhood is actually a precondition for having a good future as an adult. So crazy to think that childhood as a concept didn't even exist. But what are lessons at UNICEF that you can share, or how do you define intergenerational fairness in your work?
Sure, thank you. And I'm really delighted and very honored to be here and to discuss what really lies, to a large extent, to how do we understand the future and where does it start. So for us, as UNICEF, intergenerational fairness means that every decision that we make today is also about safeguarding the well-being, the happiness, but also the rights and opportunities of children today and the future generations. And how do we achieve that? We achieve it by realizing, understanding, and really implementing an understanding that children and young people have not only the opportunity of being consulted, but very much are part and parcel of the decision making about the future. Why? Because it is their future, but also because they need to be informed today to make the decisions about their own future. So we see the importance of really intergenerational fairness taking place by making sure that children are part and parcel of the decisions that are made today. That makes for better decision and for the chance of really keeping that future better informed. How do we do it concretely? We do a large number of things, but I think one that I would like to highlight today is what we do in terms of the training Youth Foresight Fellow. So we have a Youth Foresight Fellowships, and in fact we have several of them here in the room, and I hope they can raise their hands, our UNICEF Youth Foresight Fellows right in the middle of the room. And we don't only have them, attending, but truly participating. We make sure that they are trained, that they have the tools in foresight, in horizon scanning, and we also have reports that they issued. But we don't only train them, we make sure that they go in their communities and consult more young people and more children. So really, I think that's the key, is making sure that children and young people are very much involved into informing today's decisions that will shape our future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Virginia, you come from the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, so very far away from here, and yet you have some interesting stories to share on how you at the Forum Secretariat interpret or define intergenerational fairness. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you. Nisa Bulavanaka, Malahu Elele, and warm Pacific greetings. In the Pacific, you're correct, intergenerational fairness is not a new concept. As we say, we don't inherit the Pacific from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And this reminds us that we are kaitiaki. We are guardians, not owners, of our blue Pacific continent. And intergenerational fairness, therefore, extends beyond equity and towards intergenerational stewardship. This brings an obligation to protect our people, our culture, and our environment so that Pacific future generations can live with dignity, security, and purpose. In terms of how we are applying this through our work, it is deeply embedded in the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, which is our region's long-term vision. In practice, we see examples of intergenerational stewardship through the work of many of our regional agencies. And what it involves is a combination of youth and elders that are co-designing our shared aspirations, combining cultural grounding and memory of the elders with the energy and innovation of our youth. An example of this is the Pacific Youth Council, which holds assemblies such as Toa Te Mata Leo Pega, Cast the Net Anew. And in this format, we see youth and elders developing priorities together. They blend new ideas with traditional knowledge. These practices are also grounded in our culture and our values, because that is the foundation for intergenerational stewardship. And as we look ahead, we will continue this commitment to be working across generations.
Thank you. I like that you have that dialogue between generations, because one thing that bothers me, at least back in Europe, is this very acrimonious fighting, younger people against older people saying, you stole the future from us with all the decisions that you took, and older people feel like they have no place, even if they have time left, they're not allowed to say anything. So that kind of diffuses it, and because studies show that the older you become, the better you get at imagining the future, even though officially, objectively, you have less time left. So it's always a team sport, the future. Lucie, how do you think, or from your observation, how has the concept of intergenerational fairness has evolved? And is there anything we can learn from mistakes that we made, or things that we can do differently now and in the future?
Well, I think the concept really evolved from, let's say, the environmental ethics approach at some point, even in the 70s, more philosophical. Then it became more of an international kind of concept that we not always agreed on. And I remember from my childhood when global warming was a very negative thing, and only when the economic case was made and it was rebranded for climate action, then it became actually a more positive policy. And now with actually the aspect and focus on the future generations and also what we leave behind as a legacy of our generations, it's something that is increasingly valued as an international policy. I think there's a very clear evolution of intergenerational fairness just in this one policy sector. In the European Union, we have increasingly focused on involving youth. We had our EU Youth Strategy from 2019 to 2027. We also proclaimed the EU Year of Youth in 2022. We also do focus on our aging population and have a green paper on aging, because in Europe, in fact, the intergenerational fairness also comes with taking care of not leaving no one behind, if I can use also this concept from the EU, but that means not letting the youth down, but also not forgetting about the aging population and the elderly in future and in the future of Europe. And we're also looking at our demographic shifts most recently. Maybe an announcement on what is coming and what we have learned from it. We have annual foresight reports, and we really try to identify a bit more of a long-term vision and planning when it comes to intergenerational fairness. And at the beginning of next year, we will be announcing our first EU intergenerational fairness strategy. Which in particular will mandate all the EU sectoral policies to mainstream intergenerational fairness concept in their considerations and implementation. It's something that we've done with climate action in the past, so that's actually the lesson that we have learned, and it has worked, because these are not policies that you can just adopt and work on it in silo. These are policies that have to be taken into consideration across all the spectrum of decision making in the European Union. So I think this actually is the gist of the evolution in the European Union when it comes to intergenerational fairness, and hopefully this strategy, which was put together with a citizens panel, with randomly selected 150 citizens across the 27 member states, is maybe a first concrete examples of how we try to embed intergenerational fairness in decision making.
Thank you. Cécile, is there any practices from the past that you learned from, good and bad?
Certainly, and we're still learning, but I think that when we look at the last few decades, we really see how we've been evolving from just having children present to children and young people, to listening to them, I mean, giving them the floor and then listening to them, and moving towards now more co-creation. So this is really about giving meat to what we mean by meaningful participation, not a tokenistic approach, but really meaningful participation. How do we do it? I think that the word co-creation is probably a very good way of, ensuring that young people, children, are part of the co-creation. So just a few weeks ago, we organized a major conference in Nairobi, Kenya, on the future of education. And that was not only involving children and young people, but co-creating what the program was about, what we were going to discuss. And that co-creation is even something that we brought here in the Museum of the Future. And I really invite you all to go to the first floor, which is, the floor of the children's floor, where we have an exhibition. And thank you again very much to the museum and the foundation and the forum for giving children and young people the space to then do an exhibition on the future of education from their perspective, with persona of how those fellows see the future of education and what it would look like from their perspective. And we absolutely need that to have a better understanding also of how we foresee and how we imagine and shape this future.
Thank you. Virginia, any lessons? I'm sure you have lessons learned, but any lessons you want to share with us?
Thank you. I've been thinking about the learning that we've had and how it's led to an evolution in some of our practices. And the first evolution I'll speak to is the shift from intergenerational fairness being a value that is lived to being a principle that is actively shapes how we govern. This has been achieved through the development of the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. And part of the success of that process was the application of a number of foresight tools that have been adapted for the Pacific context and reflecting of Pacific values. And this work was done by the Pacific community who are here today. And it's created the space for co-creation, as you said, and for that intergenerational dialogue, which leads to intergenerational stewardship. The second evolution that we've seen is a shift in how we partner. We're seeking to partner with those who uphold Pacific values and respect that. And I would like to also take a moment to recognize the United Nations Development Program for their partnership, which has led to the Pacifica Futures report that will be showcased later on. This was a real Pacific-led process which involved policymakers, traditional navigators, youth and community representatives to use foresight tools to develop an understanding of what is required to advance foresight in the region. And it was also supported by the Pacific Islands Forum, the Pacific Community, and the Pacific Communities University. And the third evolution is a piece of work we're focusing on at the moment, which is the recognition that to move forward, we need to invest in our leaders, which is a reaffirmation. And so at our last Pacific Island Forum leaders meeting, the Pacific-centered leadership initiative was announced and will be designed through this year. This is yet another opportunity to embed both foresight tools but grounded in cultural values to advance our future. Thank you.
Thank you. My last question is about how the concept, which you just explained, has already changed since the past. How can it continue to change along with the other things that are changing? One thing I'm thinking of in particular is speed. You know, we talk a lot about acceleration, but I think it's a little bit of a simplification because it's true that certain things accelerate, but others, notably bureaucracy, doesn't accelerate. And also, I don't know if you've noticed, we heard this also in the previous panel, certain typically human things do not accelerate. Like falling in love does not happen faster these days. So we have, in fact, different speeds occurring on different levels. So how can we make sure this concept is not sidelined by this divergence in speed? Lucie, can I start off with you?
I mean, I'm not really worried that this concept could be sidelined. I think this has really become a very important focus for globally, even if you look at the recent developments at the UN, you know, the UN conference of the future in 2024 and a Pact for the Future adopted last year. We've worked on it even at the UN level for a while. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, which is, in fact, a lot of it is about intergenerational fairness. But also previously, the Millennial Development Goals really tried to restore a lot of these inequalities, including across generations. I think it's becoming more and more focused and also more informed with the lessons learned from the past, hopefully with growing cooperation as we see at the UN level. There are definitely different speeds and there are also different concerns to address, and we do see that also across the European Union. And so what we do at the EU level is to provide framework and to provide guidance how to increase the focus on intergenerational fairness, for example, through the mainstreaming and through a number of considerations that are important when we do decision-making and new policy frameworks. But at the same time, our member states are addressing what is the most relevant for them and what is maybe the most pressing issue when it comes to intergenerational fairness. So I can give you two examples. We have in Finland a committee on the future, which integrates long-term foresight into parliamentary work. And on the other hand, in Spain, we have intergenerational equity mechanism, which is balancing current spending with, in fact, future indebtedness. Again, so debt for the future, not to leave a very... you can see there's a different approach and different focus that comes from the realities in our member states. And I think this is how it's going to look also globally, where different countries will have to focus on the key challenges that they have and the key challenges that they expect that their youth or future generation will face.
Thank you, Cécile. How does speed, or how can we make sure that with the differences in speed, we don't sideline intergenerational fairness?
We can certainly need to be vigilant. And we need to be vigilant because first we have globally an aging population with, if we foresee the population growth, we will have some region, including Africa, with more young people, but of course a lot of aging populations around the world. So keeping in mind the importance of having governance systems that take decisions today that really ensure that those that will be living with the consequences of those decisions are a part of, in them, have a voice that is really considered in shaping these decisions. That's really important. How to do it? I think we really need to make sure that our governance systems are not only reactive, but very much proactive, and that our governance systems become anticipatory. That's really, I think, something that will be music to the ears of many people here, but we really need to make sure that that's the case. And that, in particular, to keep pace with technological development that runs a number of risks for humans, including for young people, as we discussed in the earlier session. We need to make sure that we remain human-centered and youth-centered and keep children in mind as we make this decision, which also means we need to embed a foresight approach as part of those governance so that we really test the decisions that we make today in line with their long-term consequences technologically for the environment, but also just for human societies generally. And maybe a last thing that I will really just, that I think advocates for this is that we really know that, for instance, to react to technology, young people are so much better. Children are. I mean, in fact, as we were sitting here waiting to come here, we were exchanging experience on how our children, our nieces, nephews are so much better than we are on tech issues. We all experience that as adults. So how do we really not only consult children and young people, but make sure that they are really shaping our understanding of today to make better decisions for the future? That's a huge potential that is, not fully tapped. And so the question is, how do we tap in it and make sure that we have better decisions made because they involve children and young people?
Thank you. Virginia, what is your recommendation for how to make sure that it doesn't get sidelined?
I think there are moments where we need to slow down, and there are moments when we need to speed up. If you look at the concept of governance across the Pacific, governance is built through relationships, through trust, and through collective responsibility. We have traditions such as Talanoa, respectful dialogue, of Va, which is the space that honors connections between people, and these shape what we call the Pacific Way. The practice of the Pacific Way grounds our governance systems in culture and values, and this is something that is very difficult to speed up. The trust taken by the investment of time and connection creates solutions that are owned and more impactful. In terms of a moment where we need to speed up, I want to share the example of the youth in the Pacific who are not only shaping national and regional governance, but are also reshaping international governance to uphold intergenerational fairness. And the example is a campaign that was led by Pacific law students from the University of the South Pacific in Vanuatu. And this campaign of these students resulted in the historic ruling of the International Court of Justice, which affirmed that states have a legal duty to protect the rights of and well-being of future generations. And I think for me, this is one of the clearest demonstrations where Pacific voices, and especially our young people, can shift global systems for intergenerational fairness.
Thank you, that's very beautiful. Allow me to close this panel with quoting from memory, so probably gonna make a few mistakes, Isaac Newton. He said something like, if I can look further, then it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. So let's all try and be giants for the next generation that's coming up. And please join me in an applause thanking Lucie, Cécile, and Virginia this morning.